Hello Flosstube, this is AM Dreaming Stitcher, and today I thought I would bring you a chart parade. This is part of a series of videos I have planned to put all of my charts and kits out there to share with those who like to see cross stitch. I know I will never get them all made myself. I know that they are excessive, and I hesitated to ever do this parade because I don't want to promote overconsumption and waste. But I know that when I pass, everything I've collected will also pass on to someone, so it's not entirely a waste. And while I am here, I can at least have the pleasure of knowing that I provided a few minutes of entertainment for those who are interested in seeing even just a tiny microcosm of the great cross-stitch universe. What I have may not be to your taste, but that's okay. Somebody I know will share my interests and may enjoy what is shown. So I hope you'll be one of those. I'm not sure what to say about each chart. This is my first chart video, and I thought I better put one up sooner rather than later to give me the opportunity to get feedback from you all in ways to improve these parades when I'm talking about charts. What should I say about the things? What is excessive? I really don't know what you like to hear. So today my thought was I'll of course give the name and the designer, and I thought it might be helpful to you if I mentioned things like the fibers that were used or are recommended and the stitch count. This one, for example, is a very small. I'm starting with some of my smallest charts. It has a design area of only 36 by 36 stitches. Now, when a piece is full coverage, that means the entire 36 by 36 is all filled up. And you can figure out the stitch count with really simple math. You just multiply the two numbers together. And that would tell us that this stitch area, since it is full coverage, is 1,296 stitches. That's actually a pretty small project. On the other hand, I know that one of the, if not the largest chart that I may have to show is a Dutch Beauty from Permin, and it has a stitch area of 630 by 390. That amounts to an area in excess of 245,000 little squares. But of course, it's not full coverage, so you're not really stitching every one of those 245,000 spaces. But if I do mention the stitch count on each project, you can kind of relate them one to another and get an idea how much work they would be if you're interested in them in yourself. This one is given DMC fibers for making it, but they have an alternative done with a combination of DMC and Mill Hill beads, and that's what they're showing a picture of on the back. I know that my lighting is not great and that my camera is going to do things like focusing in and out. So I apologize, I really don't have control over that. This is the equipment I've got. But by knowing something about it, you could always look it up elsewhere and maybe get a better image if you see something that interests you. Okay, I will probably go much more quickly as we go through because that was sort of the introductory design and I won't have nearly as much to say. The next handful are from JBW Designs. This one is called Rabbits in the Round. It is designed by Judy Whitman. She is the J and W of JBW Designs. Her model has been done with a variegated floss, but she also gives an option on the inside for doing it with solid colors. I have to carefully look to be sure I'm not going to accidentally show you any charts because that would be a violation of copyright and I don't want to do that. But sometimes I may want to show you something on the inside. In this case, she shows a version that's been stitched with solid flosses rather than the variegated. And there is a little kind of bonus chart in here of a bunny holding an umbrella. And of course with charts, because you're not given all the materials to start with, you can choose any colors you want. You can change out the fibers. You can do all kinds of things. Now the actual area of those is a little harder to calculate because they were circular. The round rabbit was 82 by 81, and the little one with the umbrella was 30 by 36. Here's another set from JBW Designs. This is what she called the Seaside series, And I got this one at a LNS, and I was just kind of looking for something I would like to stitch, and these seemed charming enough. They remind me of a lot of designs that you may see later in one of my chart parades from, oh goodness, I can't think of their name, but they call them tribal patterns because they have a lot of shapes that help create a shape. There are 3 in here, and their stitch count is the angelfish was 69 by 58, the flamingo was 54 by 74, and the seahorse was 48 by 74. You could, of course, again, choose whatever fibers and things you wish to stitch with. Their models were done with a combination of different things. They had Romy's Creations, Weeks Dye Works, Classic Color Works, but they did not actually offer a DMC conversion, but you can pick whatever you want, make them the color you'd like them to be. This next one is also JBW Designs, Sweet Baby Gifts. I picked it up because I really liked the little rabbit. Apologies for the sticker over the rocking horse there. Theirs are kind of in pinks and greens. Again, same theme, you can change it to anything you want. The little rabbit in the cart was 39 by 27. The rocking horse was 32 by 33. The running rabbit was 56 by 40, so he was actually the largest. And they do give DMC colors for those, but their models weren't necessarily stitched with DMC. Now this next one is part of a series that was put out from Janlin called Janlin's Just a Chart. I think most, if not all of these, were also available as kits. I know that I have this one as a kit. I believe I got the chart first and then had an opportunity to get the kit on the secondhand market. And it is called Fresh Eggs. Very tiny there for you to try to see. My apologies. But just to know that they do have this series out there. The stitch count, the design area, is 82 by 172. And they give DMC colors to help you figure it out. They just did theirs on a plain white Aida. And again, I have that as a kit, so you'll be able to see that better in my kit parade at some point. I'm 90% sure I've got it. Now here's another challenge for my pronunciation abilities. This is a kit from a French company, Saju. Yeah, you feel free to fall down laughing if I did that really badly. I don't know how to say it. It is a version of the Bayou tapestry. I have seen them sell kits with this also that were just beyond my financial means. But with the chart, I always have the ability to try to chart it up myself if I ever get the opportunity to make it. Their kits seem to include portions of the tapestry. This is the whole thing. And the stitch area for this, I know I saw it the other day, size of motif 337 by 337. So it's pretty square. And again, if you want to know the total area, that translates to 113,569 units of stitching area. Obviously not full coverage though, but it gives you an idea how significantly much more work would go into a piece of that size at 113,000 area as opposed to that first very small thing I showed you with less than 1,300 stitches. So sometimes that can be useful information before you get in over your head, I guess. This next one, also from Saju, is a Morning Glory motif. That's actually kind of showing the chart of it, but that's all they give us to show us what it looks like. It has a stitch count. It's sort of reverse of itself, and the stitch count is, I know it's there, I'm just being obtuse. They use 10 colors for this design. That's always nice to know. 110 by 60. Okay, so on with the next. And this one is from Tiny Modernist, obviously. The model was done on a 14 count fabric, so you don't have to use something like an even weave or linen if you prefer not to. It does caution us though that it's got both cross stitch and back stitch, so for folks that can't stand back stitching, this pattern does include some. And the stitch count is 95 by 103. So that's Tiny Modernist. Circus is in town. Here is another Tiny Modernist that I have seen some Flosstubers doing. It is called The Last Unicorn. And again, they may have stitched it with particular things, but you're welcome to use others. They do give us DMC colors for it. And it's 98 stitches by 169 stitches. The Last Unicorn. The next chart is from Northern Expressions Needlework, and they clearly used some sort of fancy floss for this, which really makes the piece, it's beautiful. It's called Shades of Gold, and I haven't worked with fancy flosses before, so I don't know whether I'm brave enough to try them. I know that my stitching method is usually what they call the Danish method, where you stitch along in a row of half stitches and then come back the other way to cross them. And it's my understanding that when they're variegated, you have to go one stitch at a time instead. I haven't done that. That's why I'm a little afraid of it. I don't know whether I'd be successful. But it has a stitch count of 250 by 250. So that is not a small piece at all. Their model was stitched, or they're recommending the use of Gloriana threads, or they also show dinky dyes, DMC. So you've got some options there. And they do caution you that the dinky dyes are close but slightly lighter, and the DMC are of course solid. So they give you 3 different options for your stitching on Shades of Gold. I have seen a lot of folks do things like long dogs, for example, where they just they don't necessarily use variegated floss, but they'll do different motifs in different colors in order to bring some life to the piece when they're solid. Okay, this is the one that's a real biggie. This is the Dutch Beauty from Permin of Copenhagen, and it does have a stitch count of 630 by 390. So it has a very large stitching area, takes a very large piece of fabric. That's kind of what has stopped me from making it yet at this point, is I'm not sure what I'm going to do about the fabric. Yeah, you could buy a small car, little exaggeration there, for the cost of the fabric for a piece that large. But it is nice that they also give you a lot of historical background for the piece. They, in the booklet, talk about each motif and tell you what it symbolizes and so forth. So that's a nice one. It was done by a 13-year-old girl, by the way. That is a reproduction sampler from 1790. Okay, this one, completely different from the last one. This seems to be called Trish's Ladybug, Quaker style, from AuryTM. And I have a sibling who likes ladybugs, so I think that's what enticed me to pick this up. Obviously much less of a project than the last chart I showed, and you can stitch this with whatever colors you like, but it is a stitch count of 62 by 57. And they recommend, they did theirs with Gentle Arts threads. Now, speaking of ladybugs, these next 2 I am very glad to have. They were not cheap. It's sad because I was actually stitching when this designer was still alive and well and his charts were out there. I can remember some of them being offered in catalogs, some of his kits. But I didn't discover him kind of not this series anyway, till after the fact, by which time they had been long out of production and it can cost a fortune to get them. I know that one should never covet, but I have found myself very envious sometimes of Flosstubers who have collected the entire series or who have been gifted parts of it or who miraculously receive a kit from some kind of stitchy kindness. And I have more than enough to stitch in my lifetime. I can suppress the envy. But I did manage to get these two within a lot on eBay that I had to bid on, that was selling other kits and magazines and charts and so forth. But to be honest, I was only bidding on it for these. So although the price got pretty steep, in my mind I thought, okay, you paid this much, you got all this stuff. How much was it for the two charts? Just divide by two. That's what you paid for each chart, and it wasn't cheap. It wasn't at all cheap. But anyway, that's enough babbling about how I came to have them and how much I wanted them. These are from Professor Fizby's Wondrous Strange Collection of Wee Beasties. I have part 3 and part 4. And again, with a relative that loves ladybugs, I also have a number of kits and charts that have insect motifs. I find them interesting. So these are just, I don't know what to say about them. You either like them and understand, or you don't. They give information for DMC floss and Krynic braid, and the design area on each of these is 80 by 191. They're pretty much similar to each other. I know that he did another part that has a whole bunch of ladybugs together and designs with moths and butterflies and all kinds of things. And yeah, I'm just glad I have them and can make them now. Alright, this chart is from a company called Stony Knob Farm. I got it from eBay, and at that time they had their own store. I have not stitched up anything I got from them, but I have kitted a couple of the charts that I picked up. This cover model obviously is not a stitched piece, so I really don't have a clear idea what this would look like stitched up. But it is taken from the Book of Kells. They call it Celtic Medieval Art Design, the Book of Kells, and they give information on their store. It is a stitch count of 216 by 266. So we're not talking heaven and earth designs here. You're not going to get real precise definition of the image. But it'll look something like what we're seeing there. That can be a danger in these computer-generated charts when they don't give you a picture of how it's going to turn out. Alright, this is from Scarlet Quince. I got several Scarlet Quince patterns at the same time, and the other 3 that I got I actually charted up. I didn't have any intention of doing this one anytime soon, so I did not try to kit it with the flosses and things. But it is called Portrait of a Young Woman with Unicorn. It's based on artwork by Raphael. And yes, that is a tiny unicorn she's cradling in her arms. It calls for a lot of floss and colors. You can see the extent of the list on the back. The actual stitch count is 303 wide by 395 long. And they're recommending 16 count or higher fabric, or stitch over 2 on 32 count or higher fabric. And the nice thing about Scarlet Quince is they do give you some idea of the actual usage of floss you're talking about. So even though there are many, many colors listed, they tell you, for example, that you just need 3 yards of this one or 3/4 of a skein of that, and so on. So you can really estimate your floss usage. And they even do it for both 16 count and for 18 count, which would use less. Okay, the next chart up in my parade is one of a few Teresa Wentzler charts that I have. I have a couple of books of her designs that I'll show later, and I have some kits of hers. But in my chart parade, I don't have a whole lot to show at this point. But this one is Teresa Wentzler's Millennium. If you're familiar with her designs, it won't surprise you to know that a large part of it is stitched 1/1 within a broader section that's more like one or two strands over two. So hers definitely worked better on even weaver linen than even attempting them on something like an Aida, because on an Aida you'd have to pierce the fabric within every square to do these 1/1 sections. So this design just would not work well on anything other than a linen or an even weave, I'm sure. I've seen it stitched up, or at least people working on it, and it was beautiful. I got it in the secondhand market because of seeing others working on it. There isn't really a stitch count to give you because of the difference. I mean, every square of 2/1, let's say, or 2/2, I should say, is equal to 4 of the tinier ones. So it's not a simple math formula, let's put it that way, as far as the number of stitches you're going to create. So they don't bother to give you the stitch area. I got it in part because of the male angels. I have a thing about angels. They're, just biblically speaking, they're messengers of God. They're terrifying. There's one who guards the Garden of Eden with a fiery sword. They are the archangels. They're all powerful. And somehow the Victorians, for the most part, are responsible for giving us this idea of very feminine, sweet little angels that watch over the baby in his cradle. And I just don't see them that way. So any design, to my weird way of thinking, that has masculine angels is more in line with the way I see things, I guess. Just one of my quirks. Forgive me if it offends your own way of looking at it. Okay, this is Teresa Wentzler's The Storyteller. I paid for the Millennium probably twice the price it was published at, since I had to get it years later on the second-hand market. But this one, I'm happy to say, was only 25 cents at Friends of the Library. And it's another lovely design with her characteristic use of blended colors and areas where you may have to stitch over one. But her chart list, pardon me, not chart list, but her materials list will give you an idea just how much of an undertaking one of her designs is. There's the floss list for the Storyteller. Yes, and lots of them are blended, and some of them are half stitches. Yes, she's not an easy gal to stitch designs. And here's another, Teresa Wentzler's Egyptian Sampler. I've seen folks working on this one. Again, it employs half stitches and 1/1s and blends and the whole works. But you could, if you wanted to, just stitch portions of it. You don't necessarily have to do the whole thing. I think it is, stunning, like all of hers. And I would have to say that the floss list is actually less intimidating. And she is nice enough to give a stitch count, 160 over 190 by 198. Maybe she doesn't have any 1/1. Let's see. Oh no, there are. There are 1/1 too, but she at least gives a stitch count, 160 by 198. Okay, I'm trying to keep these to about 30 minutes each. So I've got some time here to get through this next batch, but if you are not in the florals, you may want to take a break here or wrap up, because I have quite a pile coming up, and I'll try not to say very much about each, from a company called The Silver Lining. All of them were designed by the same gentleman, Mark J. Saastad, Saastad, and all I'll really say about each maybe is the stitch count and the threads. They very frequently call for both anchor and DMC, because they're not a direct conversion, and so when you use both you get an interesting gradient of color. It adds more to it than any one company's threads give you. I don't know if I'm explaining that clearly, but I'm just going to kind of show you each and then give you the stitch count as we go along. There's going to be a lot of irises, a lot of roses, and I do have some that are other flowers. But as I said, if you're not in the florals, this is probably going to take up the rest of this installment. So this is crystal ribbon, and I actually have all the flosses for it. It has a stitch count of 159 by 260 and calls for both anchor and DMC. Next we have Dream Lover. So I'll give you a moment to have a look at that one. It's kind of a bluish purple iris. And it has a stitch count of 169 by 278. You can tell these are not small. This one, however, is nice enough to use all DMC, so you don't have to worry about combining the DMC and the anchor with this one. Here's another one, Gay Parasol. I'll give you a chance to get a look at that. Same company, same designer. Again, it's the silver lining. This one has a stitch count of 142 by 261. And happily it's just using DMC. Then we have Pink Parasol from something they call the Pink Iris collection. I think it's my only member of the Pink Iris collection, but it tells you they did a lot of charts that I don't have. So there's a look if you want to see that. It has a stitch count of 167 by 297. And it does require both anchor and DMC. And they have a little caution here too. Also keep in mind that the colors will be brighter on the stitched piece than on the photograph. So you have the combination of my poor lighting and the fact that they are acknowledging their photograph isn't even true to life as to how intense and beautiful these things turn out to be. Yeah. So often that's the case. When you see something actually stitched up, it's just astounding. This one is called Purple Passion. As I said, expect quite a few irises. Give you a chance to see that one. And it has a stitch count of, it uses both DMC and anchor. Stitch count 149 by 262. Most of theirs they did on 16 count or 32 count fabrics. And so they do give you kind of an idea of the number of inches that would be used if you did a 16 count. So I'll mention that on this next one if they do it. This one's called Purple Perfection. And the stitch count is 178 by 276, done on a 32 count fabric. So just to give you the idea, on 32 count going over 2 threads, you'd end up with something 11.1 by 17.2 inches. So instead of just spouting stitch count numbers, that gives you some idea how large they really are. This one uses DMC and anchor like the others. Here's another iris, Sapphire Hills. Give you a chance to see that one. And it has a stitch count of 170 by 261. And seems to use only DMC. This one has been signed by the designer. It is called Summertime Blues. And it has a stitch count of 169 by 278, using only DMC flosses. Yellow Fascination. And this is the last of my irises. Then we're going to start getting into roses. It has a stitch count of 173 by 291 and uses both anchor and DMC. Now this one is called A Bed of Roses, and it's much more square in shape than most of those irises were. This one says it's the third of a set of 12 red roses. So again, Silver Lining has made far more charts than I actually have, and yet I have more charts than I could stitch in the rest of my life. This one has a stitch count of 145 by 146 and uses both DMC and anchor, but not a lot of anchor. It's mostly DMC. The next one is another rose called Broadway. Again, all of these are from the Silver Lining. They've all been designed by the same gentleman, Mark Sastad. And this one has a count of 201 by 292 And I find it encouraging that their model was done on 16 count, so for those of us that might be less enthusiastic about the other even weaves, it's nice to know you can do it on an Aida. And that was entirely with DMC. Next rose up is called Cabana. There's a look at what Cabana looks like. Again, they are brighter in real life than my computer's showing you, and according to these folks, much brighter in person than the pictures. This is done with both Anchor and DMC, and has a stitch count of 209 by 275. The next rose is Diana, in loving memory of the People's Princess. So for those of us old enough to know, that means Princess Diana of the United Kingdom, the Princess of Wales. And this is a stitch count of 340 by 187, done entirely with DMC. Next rose is called Ingrid. It's there in lovely red rose. The picture looks a little dark to me. I'm sure it's much brighter when stitched. It's a combination of Anchor and DMC. Stitch count 138 by 206. This one is the New Millennium Rose. And the New Millennium Rose is kind of an orangish looking in person, and it has a stitch count of 199 by 264. I've got 4 more roses, and then I think I'll wrap up this video, and the other flowers will have to wait for the next chart video presentation I may do. This one is Paradise, kind of purpley pink looking. If you know your floss numbers, you might be able to tell from them. It's DMC and Anchor. It's a stitch count of 201 by 245. Then we have Peace, which I think is absolutely beautiful, kind of a yellow, pink, and white rose. I don't think the computer's showing you the colors in the way that would most make them have you agree how beautiful it is. But we have a stitch count, come on, sometimes my eyes can find it right off, sometimes they can't, of 219 by 290 using both Anchor and DMC. And this one is Ring of Roses, a circular one, as you can tell. It's my next to the last rose. It has a stitch count of 281 by 294, and it's entirely DMC. And the final rose in my final chart for this video is Royal Gold. It has a stitch count of 137 by 117, so it's a baby compared to most of the ones I've been showing. Alright, that's it for this portion of my chart parade. I have far more to show, and no, they aren't all silver lining flowers. There are a little of everything, well, maybe not everything, but there are long dogs and ink circles and things from Cross My Heart and Stony Creek, and I didn't even know, all Jeanette Cruz, all kinds of designers and booklets and things to be seen. I will film those at some future date, but I'm going to, in the meantime, see about uploading this and posting it somewhere in my sequence of videos so that you all can give me some criticism, some feedback before I film other chart segments, so that we'll know ways I might be able to improve it for you and make it a better experience for those who want to watch. Thank you very much if you've sat through this one. I hope you saw something that made it worth your time, and you all have a great stitchy day.